So as my kids continue to age me by growing up, getting married, going to college, moving on with their lives, these conversations about when the right time is to buy a house come up more and more often. Today I want to share some of my dad advice on when the right time might be to buy a home. As you probably noticed, the real estate and mortgage industries have done a fantastic job over the past number of decades of hammering home the American dream, right? Ideal of owning your own home. So that message is pretty loud and clear, and for good reason. I mean, it's abundantly clear, both anecdotally and through numerous studies, that people are happier. They feel more accomplished. They have a sense of pride in owning their own home versus renting. Plus, home ownership generally stabilizes and beautifies communities and families. Owning your own home is a very good thing for your mental and physical health. However, this constant drumbeat and pressure about owning your own home and getting the American dream sometimes causes people to make poor decisions about home ownership, especially surrounding the timing of buying a home. When I talk about this with my adult children who are just starting their careers and trying to figure things out in their life, here's my advice to them on when it's actually better to just rent and hold off on buying a home. So before I share my number one rule of thumb about responsible, safe, happy home ownership, let's cover the basics of what it takes to prepare. I mean, first of all, you got to be financially prepared to buy a home. And that means having no consumer debt, preferably no credit cards and no car payments, so you can qualify for as much as you need in this environment, first of all, and also just have that peace of mind to be able to handle a mortgage payment easily. Secondly, have an emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of your expenses saved up that you can rely on in cases of emergency, whether it be vehicles breaking down or medical expenses or losing a job for a period of time. So 3 to 6 months of your expenses, not just your income, really can help make a big difference. And last, make sure you saved up enough down payment. Minimum 5%. If you can do 20%, great. I mean, then you won't have mortgage insurance to deal with, but that's a tall order in today's market with the home prices as expensive as they are. So I recommend at least 5% plus closing costs. Keep that in mind, 2% or so. And if you add points to that, could be 3 or 4% of your loan amount that you need to add to the deal. So make sure you saved up a few thousand extra to cover some of that as well. You can have the seller negotiate to pay for closing costs and points, and I highly recommend that, especially in the case where you're not paying a higher purchase price for that privilege. It really does help to have that happen, and then you don't have to save up quite as much. And if feasible, my other piece of advice to my kids is see if you can qualify for a 15-year fixed mortgage rather than a 30-year fixed mortgage. That way, if you can do a 15-year fixed mortgage and you have a payment of no more than 25% of your take-home pay, I mean, that's a very conservative number, I realize, but if you can do that, you are in great shape. You don't ever have to worry about losing your home. And yes, you can definitely qualify with a mortgage lender for far more than 25% of your take-home pay and mortgage payment, but keeping it that low, 25% of your take-home pay, whether it's a 15-year fixed or a 30-year fixed, is ideal to keep you in a situation where you don't risk losing your home ever. Getting to the title of this video, my number one rule of thumb for buying a house rather than renting, assuming you have all of your financial ducks in a row and you're ready, is that you plan to be in that location, you plan to own that home for at least 5 years. Why do I say that? Well, anything less than 5 years gets a little iffy because it just doesn't give you quite enough time to weather any downturns there might be in real estate during that time period, during the first couple of years of home ownership. I mean, what if you had to change jobs or you had a family issue or emergency that required you to move right during a downturn in the housing market? And typically these things are cyclical, of course. Minimum 5 years generally gives you a good period of time to weather any of these dips in the housing market, even though over the long haul, housing has gone up on average, 3 to 5% appreciation per year. What you don't want to do is have to sell because of a job change or an emergency with your family right during one of these dips and be forced to write a check to get out of your house. If you had a zero down loan, that's what you would be doing. If you have 5% down, that might cushion you enough that you don't have to write a check. If you have 10 to 20% down, pretty unlikely that you'll lose your down payment, barring some major housing recession like we saw back in 2008, 9, 10. So to better illustrate my point, take a look at this Federal Reserve prepared chart that shows the median price of homes going back to the early 1960s. There's a long-term general trend upwards over the last number of decades regarding home ownership. So you're in a position to benefit from being a homeowner over the long term. However, see how that line isn't straight? There's jags in there. It's jagged, it goes up and down. And what you don't want to do is be in one of the situations where you're stuck in one of the downward jags and need to sell right after you purchased at one of the higher points right before that. So even though it doesn't look like a big move from a distance on this chart, if you zoom in, you'll see that those downward corrections are typically 5 to 10% temporary price drops. So if you bought a home with less than the bare minimum of 5 to 10% down that I recommend, you could be in a situation where you're barely breaking even and possibly losing the down payment you put down just a year or two earlier when you bought the home. Or worse, literally writing a check for thousands of dollars at the closing table just to get out of the home you just bought a few years ago. You don't want that. Now, nobody, and I repeat, nobody is good enough at timing the market to know when they're buying a house at a high point or a low point 100% of the time. The difficult thing about predicting is seeing the future. The price you think is the low point might just be partway down the slide. But again, that doesn't matter if you're holding on for at least 5 years minimum. Again, that just gives the market time to correct so you're not stuck in one of the troughs of the market. So that's the rationale behind my time horizon, my 5-year ownership rule of thumb, which ties nicely into another video I recorded about one of the easiest ways to know you're not financially ready to buy a house yet. Click or tap on that next video, and I'll see you there.